One of my team taught me that trick. If you put your hand up, everyone looks at you. It's very, very clever. So, day 3 in the Big Brother house. Good morning. My name's Mark Lloyd. I'm the Chief Executive of the Rivers Trust, proud member of the Missing Salmon Alliance. It's my great pleasure to welcome you back to the final day of the Wild Salmon Connections conference. And shortly I'll be handing over to our excellent moderator, Ella McSweeney. Ella has really led us expertly through the past 2 days, and I'm sure will do today. And has not only shown an incredible detailed knowledge of every subject that's come up, but has unfailingly asked all the questions that I would have wanted to ask, and more I wasn't smart enough to come up with. So by way of appreciation, I don't want you to give her a round of applause. I'd like to ask you actually to give her a standing ovation. So for those of you who've been here for a couple of days, this will be hackneyed, but brief reminder of the housekeeping points. I'm sure those of you who've been here can zone out for a moment or two, but CCTV is in operation and there are no fire drills today. If the fire alarm does go off, please evacuate the building and assemble on Fishmongers Wharf, which is located along the north side of the river. And if you need any first aid, if you overdid it at the banquet last night, then please contact reception. And any concerns about food allergens, speak to the butlers. And a final reminder that journalists may be in the room and the event is being professionally recorded. So, moving on to the final day of the conference, and a really fantastic and inspiring couple of days we've had. So far. And it was brilliant to be joined not just by 1, but 3 environment ministers yesterday and to hear their perspectives. It's a great commitment for them to come and listen to what we had to say, and that does demonstrate just how important it is that we've come together at this conference. But I think it was also clear that, certainly from 2 of the 3 ministers, that we have much work to do to make their policies more radical and urgent. What we also heard yesterday was that for wild salmon to survive and thrive, we need to consider them in the context of the wider ecosystems of the rivers and seas that they live in. And as we've seen already, that means taking a collaborative approach to water and land management and restoring whole river catchments at pace and at scale. This is not only vital for saving wild salmon, but for building our own resilience to droughts and floods associated with climate change. We must take a systems approach to fixing our water and natural environment if we're going to save salmon. So today our focus is on the future and what we can all do to protect wild salmon and improve the natural environment for people as well. We will hear more about catchment restoration and the role nature finance can play in achieving restoration goals through real-life examples. But first, I have the great pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Alastair Fothergill. Alastair has no doubt made an impact on all of our lives. He's currently a WWF ambassador and a director and co-founder of Silverback Films. His recent productions include David Attenborough's Wild Isles and Our Planet. Other collaborations with Sir David include, amongst others, The Blue Planet, Frozen Planet, and Planet Earth, possibly the best television programs ever made. Not only this, he has been behind 5 of the top 10 grossing natural history cinema films ever. So I'm delighted and deeply honoured to introduce Alastair to tell us his stories behind filming the salmon migration in Wild Isles. Welcome, Alastair.
Thank you, Mark, very much indeed. I'm going to talk to you principally this morning about the power of communication and mass communication, which I think is a critical weapon in the fight to preserve the health of our freshwater systems and the salmon in particular. And as Mark said, I'm going to talk about the making of Wild Isles. Now, Wild Isles was a series that we did with Sir David Attenborough It aired on the BBC last March, at March 23, and it actually, and it surprised the BBC, I have to say, it was the 6th most watched show on the whole of British television that year. Only the likes of I'm a Celebrity and all that sort of rubbish beat us. And the BBC said, why did that happen? You beat Planet Earth 3. And I said, well, British people care about their wildlife. And in fact, the audience so far is 12 million people, and it's still going strong on iPlayer. If you're one of the sad people who didn't see the show, I just thought you might like to see a trailer. The freshwater episode was one of 5 major episodes that looked at all the key habitats in the UK. As I'm sure you know, there are 150,000 rivers in Britain and Ireland. They're sort of these extraordinary blood vessels that touch almost every part of our country. But it's a very sad fact that all of the rivers in England are now polluted, and most of those in Wales and Scotland are as well. So we felt we had a really critical story to tell. Our ambition was to show the beauty of our freshwater systems and the animals and plants that live there as it's never been seen before. The narrative was to follow the journey from source to sea. And we wanted to film the familiar in a way you've never seen before, but also to show some of the unseen. This is a water shrew. It actually occurs in many, many rivers. Very few people see them. They're the size of your thumb, extremely fast moving. From the very, very beginning, it was clear that salmon were going to be a key part of the freshwater narrative. And the reason we felt they were important, apart from the fact they're obviously unbelievably beautiful animals, is they are in a sense the canaries in the coal mine when you look at freshwater health. Because they journey from sea to source and back, they go through all the freshwater habitats, and they allow you to monitor the quality of the freshwater systems extremely well. Our aim was to film the complete migration, every stage of it, from the sea all the way up the rivers, right up to their breeding grounds in the headwaters. To be honest, it turned out to be the hardest sequence in the whole of the series, and I'll explain later why. We started our journey at the River Ness, at the mouth of the River Ness, near Inverness, where bottle-nosed dolphins wait for the returning salmon as they come out on the tide. And I'd like to show you the final sequence from the series about the salmon migration. That sequence took 72 days in total in the field, and every different parts of it were filmed in different rivers. I think we filmed at over 7 rivers. We filmed at the Hope Estuary, the River Ness, Helmsdale, the Berrildale Leap. We had an enormous amount of help from many landowners, and we developed a lot of new technology, particularly to try and film them underwater. And I'm just going to show you now a short making-of film that shows the sort of effort and passion that went into filming just that 8-minute sequence. As you can see from the end of that making-of film, it was very important to us that we weren't just celebrating British wildlife, but we were also explaining the challenges that we face. I suppose our key message, our key ambition was to really raise the awareness of the British public about 2 key things. First of all, we are globally important for nature. You know, over 65% of the chalk streams in the world are in the UK. We have more ancient oak trees than the whole of Europe put together. We're massively important for migrating waders and geese. We have the largest grouse moors, and, well, not just grouse moors, moorlands in the whole of Europe. And yet most people in Britain don't even know that. They don't even realise how important the UK is globally, not just to us. But at the same time, we are in the bottom 10% of biodiverse, depleted countries. It's a really interesting, contrasting story and was really critical to our ambition in Wild Isles. The TV series itself was actually just the shop window for a massive campaign that we did in partnership with our 3 key partners, the RSPB, WWF UK, and the National Trust. Called the Saving Wild Isles campaign, It was the most ambitious communication about British wildlife that these charities had ever done with the BBC. So far, 1.5 billion people have interacted with all the online content. 70,000 people were brought together to create a people's plan for nature. What everybody from across our society wanted to do in the UK for our wildlife, and that was presented to the House of Commons. We also raised £2.6 million for little projects. People saying, I want to turn this area into a hay meadow. I want to do this. And that was really important. We wanted to engage people at every level, at school, at home, and in business. But most importantly, it also funded a sixth episode that wanted to celebrate what could be done, what are the positive stories, and who are the heroes at the cutting edge of conservation in the UK today. That sixth episode is still available on iPlayer if you'd like to see it. The other thing the charities specifically asked us to make were 20-minute films aimed at 4 key communities: the business community, the finance community, farmers, and fishermen. And these were films saying, this is what you can do as a farmer or a fisherman or in finance to really help us to change things. And you know, where people's pension funds are spent is one of the most critical things when it comes to conservation. Those films have been shown to thousands of people in hundreds of companies. Lots of presentations were done. I went to many of them. Very, very inspiring. Every single employee of Price Cooper Waterhouse has seen this film. And they're still available on YouTube. And if you have a business and you would like the World Wildlife Fund or the RSPB to come along and do a session with you, they'd be really up for it. As I said, all those films are available. The Saving Our Wild Isles campaign is still going strong. And I just don't have time to list today all the wonderful things that have been happening around it. But I would like to tell you one story. For the end of Programme 1 of Wild Isles, we took Sir David Attenborough, he was 86 at the time, to the island of Skomer off West Wales. I went on the recce, and there are 87 steps for when you land on the boat till you get to the top of the island, very steep steps. And I have to say, I rang up his daughter, Susie, who looks after David now, and I said, Susie, I'm really worried. There are 87 really steep steps. And she said, Alastair, there are 22 steps from our hall to David's study. I'm sending him up now 4 times, and I'll ring you. 10 minutes later, she said, Alastair, it's on. And he came, and we had the magical time. We did a piece at night for the final episode Among the Manx Shearwaters, and sat him among the puffins. And I'd just like to show you this final clip. That was a powerful call to action, and the then Secretary of State for Environment, Teresa, saw that and immediately turned to her team and said, we have got to ban sand eel fishing. Now, the RSPB had campaigned for 25 years for that. And I'm delighted to say, as you can see, last March, it was totally banned in Scottish and English waters. This is massively significant for all our seabirds, and the puffin numbers have already increased. It's a sad fact, though, that at the moment the Danish government are trying to appeal against it. 90% of our sand eel fishing is done by the Danes, and it's all used to feed their pigs, their captive salmon, and also, amazingly, to fire up their power stations. It's extraordinary, and I really hope the British government stays strong. I think it's important to tell you that story, because I really believe that we can do the same for salmon. You need millions of people who talk to their politicians to get their heads around the story. And I would say if you go out in the street and stop most people here, they'd have no idea about salmon in this country. They just think you get it at Sainsbury's. And I think, there is no way that you are going to win your battle without the support and our help. And we're really ready to keep on with the narrative. But I think the important thing to say is we will continue working with salmon. They're such a critical species in the whole of the UK, but obviously particularly in Scotland. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone. Alastair, thank you so much for that. And most importantly, I'd like to ask you, how is Sir David?
Do you know, he will be 89 in May. I'm still working with him a lot on another project, and he's extraordinary. He's absolutely extraordinary. Getting a little bit forgetful at times, but...
Fair enough.
Fair enough. And liking to stay in Richmond. He's not going to travel the world anymore,
right,
but still doing an amazing job as a narrator and, yeah, inspirational person.
Well, thank you so much for all the work that you've done. You've brought a huge amount of joy, certainly into my house. I have a rule with my kids. I try to stick to it. No television during the week apart from Sir David's work. So, all the work you've done, and they love it because of that. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about storytelling. We've heard a little bit about the power of storytelling, the importance of storytelling. You've just given a very good example where it can work and be effective at policy level with Teresa Coffey's ban of sand eel fishing and all the rest. But overall, can you have any measure of how effective it is? I mean, it's obviously absolutely joyous to see these films. Does it translate into action? Have you seen that?
I mean, obviously, we live and breathe by audience figures. And, you know, at 11 o'clock the next day after a show goes out, you get the exact figures. It's sort of the moment of judgment. It's harder. There are so many screens, there's so many choices. You know, when I did Planet Earth, 16 million people sat down on a Sunday evening to watch Planet Earth. You went on the bus and everybody was talking about it. Wild Isles, as I said, on the initial transmission got 6 million. It was the most watched show on BBC One. The BBC were delighted. But I think we're now working in a world where the barrier between broadcast TV and online has disappeared. My children never sit down and watch the telly. The idea of sitting for an hour with their parents. But no, we're all on different screens. But I think we have to embrace that. I think we have to realize that TV is just, well, actually, it's online. It's just the length of the program. So Wild Isles was an hour-long program that you could watch online or on the TV. The Saving Our Wild Isles campaign had an enormous amount of short-form content as well. Many young people will not watch something longer than 5 minutes. More young people watch YouTube than watch the BBC. So we have to think of this as an opportunity and a challenge. I think the important thing as well is to get people to sit down on a Sunday evening when they're tired with a gin and tonic. It's got to be celebratory. You cannot wag fingers. You've got to say, look, it's so beautiful, and you don't realize it's here. And that was one of the great successes of Wild Isles. But what we were really proud of is to have an impact campaign around it. Working with the charities who can get you out with the people, they can arrange school opportunities, all sorts of different things. You can't just think of it as a TV program. And
so is there a sense that you can then measure not just the numbers the next morning, but the impact?
Yes. The charities spend their money with enormous care, and just 6 months ago came back to me with a complete report that they'd done on whether they had spent their money well. And they looked at all sorts of factors, and yes, they are very, very delighted. They said it's been the most effective campaign that they have ever done for British wildlife. Let's face it, if all we did was ban sand eel fishing in British waters, I would go very happy to my grave.
You've been in this business a long time, and I know from speaking to ecologists that they talk about living in a world of wounds where things just are so increasingly hard to find, and it's so desperate to be in that world. For you in your career, has it been increasingly more difficult to get the footage that you're looking for? Have you seen that change?
There's absolutely no doubt that I have seen a lot of change in the natural world. I mean, my particular passion are the poles. I've worked a lot in Antarctica and Arctic and the Arctic. I've been down to the island of South Georgia many, many times, a beautiful island. Hurley, the famous photographer with Shackleton, took an image of a beautiful glacier. And when we went back in the 90s with David Attenborough, I got David to walk in front of that glacier and mix the two images. And I went back again this time last year, and that glacier is screaming up the mountain. At the same time, I have never seen so many humpback whales in my life. Since the banning of whaling in the 1960s, there are now more humpback whales in global seas than ever before. And I think the thing that gets me up in the morning, apart from my own personal passion for nature, is the resilience of nature. It's extraordinary how things can bounce back. I mean, we are now making possibly a final film, a movie with David about the ocean. And he's absolutely fired up about it, because if you're going to say, how do we save the planet, we save the ocean. And I tell you why. Most of the CO2 on our planet is captured by the ocean. It's the most reliable supply of protein. Already a third of our planet basically lives off fish in terms of protein. But the most important thing is cut down the rainforest, and it'll take 200-300 years to grow back. Create a marine protected area, and within 10 years, it'll have totally bounced back. 75% of our planet is the ocean. If we can create just half of that as a nature reserve, that'll be the most significant thing we can do to save our planet. And just one last figure on this. There are 6 countries, only 6 countries, that hunt in the open ocean. They go fishing for the marlin, the tuna. All of those fisheries are subsidized by their governments. None of them make any money at all. It's bonkers. No, you know, and this is why we're so passionate about this film, and that's why David is so passionate about it, because that is the hope. And coming back, because we need to concentrate on salmon, David says they are resilient animals, and they really, really are, and I think we have to give them the chance. You know, nature needs poster childs. You know, the polar bear is the poster child for the Arctic. The orangutan is the poster child for the rainforest. I think that salmon can be the poster child for freshwater systems.
You said something that has long bothered me, and I'm sure everyone here, which is that people I speak to who have no interest in nature will say, but there's loads of salmon, because they've just stepped out of the supermarket, and they think, you know, and they're not thinking about it too deeply, but they think it's all there. Is the awful reality that we're facing that people just don't really care, and they like seeing these images and these extraordinary things, but fundamentally it is that shrug of the shoulders.
I think people care. I really do. I mean, certainly the young really, really care. I mean, in all honesty, they know they've inherited a screwed planet. You know, we didn't. You know, our planet, when we got it, you know, after the Second World War, the planet was pristine. David often says to me, the whole of the damage to the natural world has happened in my lifetime. But the young are so fired up about it. And, you know, I think our job is to get the people that care, to get the politicians to care. The challenge is the quality of the political world, which, you know, as of the recent American election, has only plummeted even further. But I don't care about them. We can do nothing about them, but we can really inspire the people.
I really like the idea of a people's plan for nature.
Yep.
How far could that go, and how radical could that be?
That was the charity's initiative. It was a really good idea. It brought together all sorts of different people. They went, I think they had 3 days in Birmingham, and they came up with this plan, and it went to the Houses of Commons. And after the release of Wild Isles, I went to this big event in the gardens of the House of Commons. Teresa Coffey was there. The head of the Liberal Democrats was there. The shadow Labour guy was there. All of them spoke, and this was before the election. They all said, Wild Isles and the People's Plan for Nature has really inspired us, and it's going to be in our manifestos. Well, it was in their manifestos. It seems that Labour governments seem to have forgotten their manifesto, but we just have to keep on. We just have to keep on pushing. We have to keep on pushing.
Have you seen a change in how you think of your role in what you do, from being purely an incredible producer, filmmaker, towards being an activist, a conservationist, someone who has a bigger mission, if you like?
It's very interesting. When I first worked with David Attenborough, and, you know, in the early series, I worked with him on Trials of Life, and a lot of the environmentalists criticized David for showing the planet with rose-tinted spectacles. And he used to say, first of all, you know, people won't care unless they know. The very first time that anybody filmed a snow leopard in the wild was for Planet Earth. People didn't know what a snow leopard was until then, and now the World Wildlife Fund sell you toys of snow leopards and have a big campaign. So I still believe, with every new generation, well, everybody actually, there's a lot to say. In Wild Isles, there was loads of wildlife that nobody had ever seen. They just didn't know. They didn't know what water shrew was. They'd never seen golden eagles taking barnacles in the wing. So, there was a lot to celebrate. But yes, I have realized that it's no longer good enough just to be celebratory, because it's dishonest. But at the same time, if you communicate a simply negative message, all you do is wag fingers at people, they just stick their heads in the sand. So what you have to do is to say, this is what we've got. It's still amazing. This is why it's threatened. And you have to empower people. You have to give them solutions. And the Saving Our Whales campaign, and that 6th episode I showed you, is full of solutions. It's full of, there's that farmer there's a farmer up in Yorkshire who's, a very small farmer, but you could argue it's easy for him to go very green. The other farmer is a Suffolk grain baron, okay? The most financially successful, farmer you could have. He has turned his farm round, completely turned his farm round. And so I think it's very important to give people solutions.
I was interested in the point at which Sir David said the reality is the reduction is 70%. And it was, if I'm right, just at the peak of that phenomenal sequence. So at the point where your heart is soaring and you're so fascinated, interested, he kind of delivers this punch, which is, do you realize that 70% have gone? And I wonder, am I over-interpreting that, or are you very careful where in the sequences you are actually delivering that reality?
We thought very, very hard about the actual shows, because as I mentioned earlier, Sunday evening, you don't want to have it bang down your throat. And we didn't film pollution or farming and all the sort of negative images. It was all celebratory images, but we used numbers very, very carefully. And we chose the key numbers throughout the series. When you say that most of the world's, most of Europe's oak trees, ancient oak trees, are in the UK, wow, I didn't know that. When you say that 65% of the chalk streams in the world are in the UK, that's really powerful. And when you say that salmon have declined by 70% in the last 20, 25 years, that's really powerful. But less is more in that. You have to hit people with the key facts that they get up in the morning or they go to the pub the next day and say, did you know that? And I'm not interested in communicating to 100 people. I'm interested in, I want to get to the people who would never normally know or care about these issues.
Indeed. Do we have questions? I'm sure we do. Please wait for a microphone. Yes.
Thank you. Alastair, the Prime Minister recently tried to make a joke of those of us who are trying to save millions of fish being killed every year by the Hinkley C power station. Mm-hmm. The Chancellor today is in Oxfordshire talking again about economic growth and building a third runway at Heathrow Airport. They seem to have completely lost the important need of nature as a fundamental to economic growth. If you could speak to the Chancellor today, what would be the one message that you would want to give her?
The first thing I'd say is that actually, people who know about business and industry actually look at the challenge of turning the planet round and the carbon challenge and the biodiversity challenge and recognize it as a wonderful opportunity. The Chinese have recognized it. They're making millions of solar panels. And it's not financially negative. If it's well directed and well managed and government gives industry the right incentives, not only does it have the power to do amazing things for the environment, but it also has the power to deliver enormous income. And it's the future, and they need to grab that. And the problem with governments is they always think short term, and nature is long term. You don't turn things around in the short term in nature, although you can with the oceans, but generally it's a long game. And I think it's persuading them to play the long game. I mean, those are the sort of things I'd say. And I'd also say, if you don't think that climate change is the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced, both on a human scale, but also on a financial scale, you basically don't know, you're stupid. And says, just get real. You know, I mean, how many times has Miami got to flood? How many times have we got to have another massive storm that knocks over all our trees? I mean, it's just happening, and it's happening much faster than anybody predicted 10 years ago. So just get real. You know, we are 100% reliant on the natural world. All those contributors to that film, that was the head of Safeway, that was the head of Aviva. These are people at the cutting edge of business. They know that their business is dependent on a healthy planet, and she needs to know that Britain is dependent on a healthy planet.
What role does the media have to play in all of that? Because politicians can be easily alarmed by a media that is complaining about things that need to happen, like reducing the amount of diesel on the roads and all the rest. So, I mean, journalists, the media, editors, in the middle of that sandwich between the public and the politicians.
I think it's really, really high-quality journalism. And the challenge that journalism has at the moment is that there's so much appalling, it's not even journalism, but appalling communication online. You know, and our children are getting their news from those sources. And I mean, it's so unhealthy and so damaging, which is why we are so damn lucky to have the BBC, because the quality of journalism, Justin Rowlatt, you know, the BBC's environmental correspondent, is a genius. And the dedication that goes into really quality communication and intelligent communication is critical. And the government, you know, in the end, they get voted for. And, you know, people are screaming for green policies.
Any more questions? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Alastair. In your work, have you considered giving a hint on open net salmon farming as part of these challenges that you show to wild salmon?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Have you considered giving a hint or a bit of a focus on open net salmon farming that is a part of the challenges that wild salmon face?
I think the whole story of captive breeding of salmon is a really, really, really interesting one, particularly in the UK. It's very, very political in Scotland. I'm sure many of you in this room are very, very, very aware of the issues, and they're very, very important in this country.
And is that going to be, she says, difficult? I mean, is that uncomfortable, the thought of it? How do you navigate that? How do you from an editorial point of view, how do you decide where to go?
I think you go for the truth. I mean, you know, there are two stories, you know. A lot of people, salmon's very healthy food, you know, it's really good that people eat salmon. A lot of people can't afford wild-caught salmon. We're not going to stop captive breeding of salmon. It's actually a good support, you know, it's a good thing in many ways. It's just how it's done. The pollution it causes, I mean, you know the problems it causes. And we need to make sure that the industry is very, very strongly regulated to not do the damage it's presently doing.
And on a broader note, there are polluters everywhere. How do you decide when to include that as part of what you do and when to just focus on the nature part?
I'm a nature boy. My job, my skill, I'm not an environmentalist. My skill is to film those salmon like you've never seen them before. And so my first thing is always engage, 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 engage. You're never going to get 12 million people to watch an hour-long show on BBC Two about captive salmon. You never will. So, you know, celebrate and then communicate the other story.
One last question before we finish. Yes, please wait for the microphone. If you just put your hand up again, Rebecca will see you. Thank you.
We've spoken a little bit at this conference about salmon representing a generational issue and an intergenerational process that we have to move in the right direction. And no one in this room wants to be the ones that are looking back on a situation and saying we didn't act quickly enough. And I think your films have this amazing ability to bring families together and different generations together. So my question is, what's the role of storytelling in supporting care towards future generations?
I think storytelling is everything. You know, since Neanderthal man sat round a campfire, whether he or she spoke, they probably grunted, but as soon as they could speak, it would be stories. And for me, the most satisfying part of my job is storytelling. It's using beautiful images to tell stories that utterly inspire me. And the salmon story is gobsmacking. You know, so we decided, how do we tell that story? How do we engage people on that narrative? And you know, it was clear it had to be the impossible journey. Get through the dolphins, change color, wait for the rain, do the hard. I mean, that particular leap is the highest leap in Scotland, by the way. So we thought, if we're going to film that, let's film it at the highest one, and then see the challenge at the end. So yeah, I love storytelling, and that's sort of all I do, really.
And do you think, just finally on that, that we need to celebrate more older people who have done remarkable things in the past? Because there is obviously, you're inclined to look at the younger generation. What are they doing? Certainly in Ireland, the young farmers, some of them are doing such incredible work. But also looking back and saying, these are the people who are going to be the best ancestors of the future, you know, and kind of finding a way to celebrate them and what they did in the past for the future as well.
I totally agree with you. I mean, you know, age comes with experience. And there are some, you know, that film, a lot of our farmers were quite old. You know, the young generation's biggest hero is a, you know, 88-year-old Sir David Attenborough. I mean, I don't think age is irrelevant in the communication at all, other than the fact that young people, you know, every new generation needs to learn. And, you know, the joy for me as a 4-year-old has never even seen a sycamore seed. And David always said to me, we have to educate every new generation. So I don't think I'm going to be out of work.
Well, thank you so much for coming along. Thank you for such an inspirational talk this morning. It set us off in such a lovely way. I think it's fair to say we all send our regards and love to Sir David.
I'll pass it on.
And thank him for everything that he has done, and long may he continue. And best of luck in Scotland.
Thank you very much.
Alastair Fothergill. Thank you, Alastair. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have to get back to a little bit of reality in terms of our sessions, but we're lucky to have a really, really great session ahead of us, scaling up river restoration. We know to meet the challenge that we face, we need ambition and scale, radical restoration at a pace that has never been seen before. So how can this be done? We have 3 people to tell you how that's going to happen. Unfortunately, Dr. James Dalton is not able to be with us this morning, but I'm delighted to introduce our first guest, our first speaker rather, Anne Willis from American Rivers. Dr. Anne Willis is the California Regional Director at American Rivers, a national conservation organization dedicated to the restoration and protection of rivers throughout the United States. And prior to working with them, she led a research program at the UC Davis Center for Watershed Sciences. So please put your hands together for Dr. Willis.
Oh, here's this, and there's that. You're welcome. What an honor to be here, though I'm really not so sure that it's a gift to be the one who follows Alastair. I'm Dr. Anne Willis. I'm from American Rivers. And when I was first invited to come here, the topic last summer that we discussed was dam removal and the U.S. Endangered Species Act. But a lot has changed since last summer, and as it turns out, the federal rule of law is our newest endangered species. So what do you do? What do you do when one of the fundamental tools that you had to do large-scale restoration maybe isn't as effective as you hoped it would be? Well, fortunately, I have a story about that. In California, on September 30th, 2024, at 5 p.m., the last truck full of the last pile of dirt from the largest dam removal in the world was completed. And when I say largest, I mean largest using many different metrics. It was 4 major hydroelectric dams, so the largest number of dams removed at once, the largest vertical total height of dams removed at once. And it's a project that took 100 miles of habitat and extended it up over another 400 miles of habitat. So just in the scale of the catchment that we're talking about, enormous. And this is actually the day, this was, D-Day for the dam. So this was J.C. Boyle on the moment that it was breached. This was Copco 1, the moment it was breached later on that day. And then Iron Gate Dam after it had been drained and you started to see, the skeleton of the river reemerge on the floodplain. The 4th dam had been removed the summer before. And you might say in a world where we have drought, where we need as many alternative sources of energy to fossil fuels as possible, is this really the right moment to be removing dams, particularly at scale? Well, I think it's an interesting question, and it's useful to ground ourselves in the reality of our constructed world. And fortunately, there was a team led by some researchers at the California Institute of Technology that did just that. They asked the question, what is the size of our constructed world relative to our living one? These cubes represent the mass of the biological kingdoms and the mass of the main types of materials that we use in our man-made structure all over the surface of the Earth. And what they found was that human-made objects, technomass, now outweighs the cumulative mass of all life on Earth. That is shocking. And what's even more shocking is, it may not be so clear here, but you might see in some of these constructed cubes a gradient of color. The lower band is everything that existed before 1990. So most of what we've built, we have done in most of our lifetimes. So I am unpersuaded that what we need is more constructed solutions to our biological problems. And when we focus on a particular kind of material, we think, what is the fundamental building block of life? Well, carbon, but also it's water. And we've talked about that for so many days. The planet is mostly water. Our bodies are mostly water. But concrete is the second most used substance in the world after water. And what do we know about a constructed material? It has a lifetime, just like anything else. And many of our dams are made of concrete, particularly in the United States. In California alone, we have over 1,400 large regulated dams that in no way counts the low-head ones that might be for an individual use. And our dams have a lifespan, and their lifespan is about 50 years old. But when we look at the age of our dams, many of them made from concrete, many of them are over 70 years old. The American Society of Civil Engineers puts out a report card on the state of American infrastructure, and it will break it down by types of infrastructure. The newest report card is actually due out this year, but 4 years ago, they put one out, and in America, our dams got a D, mostly for being high hazard for human safety. So I would argue it isn't so much that we need more dams. First of all, we need to be a lot better about maintaining things. We are very, very good at spending money to build things, and we are very, very bad at spending money to keep them in good condition. If we could just keep what we already had in good condition and operate it better, I would argue we would be a long ways down the road to solving our problem rather than making more. But dam removal is just one tool that we can use. It's just a tool to do catchment scale restoration. And I will say, so this is my first trip to London. There are so many things I'm loving, like learning what side of the sidewalk I'm supposed to walk on. thank you for everybody who stepped out of my way. Catchment scale, that's another lovely phrase. We would say watershed scale, but I've really enjoyed that one. Catchment scale restoration, I think when we talk about large scale restoration, people really focus on an image of an unpopulated landscape, something devoid of human. But the problem with that image is it's not scalable. Well, one, it's also not inspiring. What are the rest of us supposed to do if the solution is everything but people? That's hard to make people feel like there's a good way to live a life. But also, like I said, there's just not enough room for it. So how do we do catchment scale restoration in a place? This is actually a picture that a colleague of mine took. It's of the Yolo bypass. It is a massive forward-facing conservation solution where, because we have constructed major infrastructure, our cities, our capitals, our transport routes, on our floodplains, and we need floodplains, how do we get them back? Well, this flooded area in the foreground is the Yolo bypass. And I'll talk a little bit more about it, but I just highlighted to say we have solutions for both kinds of environments. We can do this. But how? We know the what, but the how, and we've said it so many times already. We need to scale collaboration. You need a collaborative partnership. This is an image that was taken the day that the updated restoration agreement for the Klamath was signed. And who is in this photo? Well, there's quite a range of people in the photo. At the time, that was our Secretary for the Interior, Sally Jewell. We had the governors of California and Oregon. We had our federal congressmen. We had the chair people of our First Nations. We had the grassroots members of our First Peoples. We had farmers and ranchers. We had industry. We had the owners of the dam. Everybody was in this room. But this is not an easy room to walk in. It all looks very celebratory now, but imagine the first day everybody walked into this room. I bet they didn't look like this. Because when we're trying to solve these big problems, everyone has something to lose. And some people, it's just economics. They'll lose money, they'll lose a resource that they've been using to generate power, but for other people, it's existential. What they have to lose is a way of life, a core aspect of their identity, and it's across the board. And for others, it's simply access to water itself. So the stakes are high. The collaboration is hard. The conversations are tense. But this isn't the only challenge that we have to overcome. And I argue that we have to overcome it with compassion, because we have to leave space in the room for people who have these different values to be in it. Our job cannot be, well, I'll only talk to you once you agree with me. That is such a waste of time. Our challenge is really the people who are benefiting from the status quo, the people who don't want there to be a room at all. Forget a room that has a big collaborative group inside of it. Because the truth is, there are people who will see the status quo as beneficial to them. But in that situation, in the end, everybody loses. And this happens in the Klamath as well. Sometimes, sadly, well, maybe I'll date myself now, but the call is coming from inside the house. Yes, we do have, in the US especially now, people who are taking these issues. They don't want a solution because it takes away an issue that they get to grandstand on. But for others, it's just mystifying what their motivation is. It took decades to put together the first Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement. And again, this was the big tent approach. And in these rooms with cabinet secretaries and chair people of our First Nations and farmers and ranchers who'd been there for generations. People were weeping as they were talking about what they were afraid of losing. And in the end, everybody was able to come together and bring something to the table to make an agreement that they could all live with and would bring stability. And what it required to make it over the finish line was congressional approval. The dam owners wanted this. The people living in these communities wanted this. Federal agencies were advising our government that they wanted this. And it took a single congressman whose job ostensibly is to represent these people. And he swore up and down that he would vote to support it, and hung up the phone and walked onto the floor of the US House of Representatives and voted no. He should be ashamed. He's also out of a job. So, what do we really need when we know that these are the threats we're facing and there isn't a lot that we can do about it? What we need, those of us in this room, to do is to scale our courage. The courage to say hard things. I've seen the courage over these past few days. The courage to ask excellent but very perceptive questions that demand an unequivocal answer. And sometimes the courage to answer it. I've seen both. But, you know, I think right here are some of the most wonderful examples of courage I saw in the Klamath Basin. You know, this is Frankie Myers. He's the former vice chair of the Yurok tribe. He's been in this since the beginning. You know, decades ago, you'll see him standing outside Scottish Power with his signs about, you know, fish, not dams. But what I love about Frankie is he really embraces this notion of walking into a room and being so clear about who he is and what he wants, and then understanding that he has to make space for the same needs of others who come from a completely different place. Right now, what I'm working on with Frankie is building a relationship with the Hart Ranch. These are 6th generation cattle ranchers. They are part of the colonial settlers back in the 1850s. That's when their family homesteaded in the Klamath Basin. They raise cattle. They raise some of the highest quality beef cattle in the country, and they do it while supporting endangered gray wolves on their ranch. They do it while supporting a range of endangered birds on their ranch. And I got a call from Blair just 2 weeks after I got this job, actually, and he said, "Ann Willis, I want to grow salmon on my ranch, and I want to do it with the Yurok tribe." And I was like, I love that. Do they want to do it with you? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, this is where we start. Let's just have dinner. Let's see if we can have a conversation and a relationship, because if you can't have a relationship, you cannot have a project. Not only is the Yurok tribe helping teach the Harts how to grow fish, but the Yurok tribe is looking for an alternative protein source while salmon recover. And they have seen what the Harts do in their ranching operation, and they want to replicate it so that they can grow cattle in the same way that the Harts are while the salmon recover, until they can come back to the place where it's not just subsistence but abundance. That's courage on an individual scale, but sometimes we really do need courage at the political and corporate scale. What you're seeing here is the CEO of Berkshire Energy. That is the parent company to Pacificor, who was the owner of the dam. It isn't just government who disappoints you sometimes. In the end, after 20 years of this campaign really being at its peak, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission said to Pacificor, the company, you cannot step away from these dams at the time they need to be dismantled. You do not get to benefit from power production for 50 years and then step away from liability when it's time to take them down. And at that point, Pacificor said, well, then we're out. We'll just keep the dams. Hugely disappointing. That was just back in 2020. The governor of California at the time, well, and still is, Gavin Newsom, sent a letter to Berkshire Hathaway, the parent company, of Pacificor, and said, don't do this. Why would you squander the opportunity we have to do something so meaningful and so important, not just for people, but for the planet. And so the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway came personally to the Klamath, took a tour on the boat. You could see there's Frankie standing next to him with a mask. And he just listened to the stories of the people to whom this meant so much. And then went back and made his decision and directed his company to cut it out, to find the solution, to find the place to make this work. You need the corporate pressure. And I think that's what our work is. It's to be the shield for folks like this, folks who are doing the hard work on the ground, for whom this is truly existential. This feels good. Does it do good? Well, we can just look at the numbers. For the Klamath, it took 3 days from the day that the dam removal was completed for the first salmon to migrate back into its ancestral territory where it hadn't had access for 100 years. Within a month, over 6,000 had returned, where for 100 years before, the number had been 0. Ackerson Meadow, this was the picture earlier. This is actually the headwaters of the Tuolumne River. This is Yosemite National Park. It's also the source of some of our most pristine drinking water. We don't even need to filter it. It's so clean. We skip an entire level of treatment because the environment does such a good job. Who would have thought that nature could have built a better water filtration system than an engineer? I am an engineer, so I get to make fun of us. Within the first year, the first winter of restoring this meadow, the water table rose 8 feet, and we had stored an additional 71 million gallons of water that had then, before then, just run off and carried a lot of sediment with it. Coming back to the Yolo bypass, and this is actually a project being led by some really good partners and friends of mine at other NGOs in the state of California. The Yolo bypass is massive. It runs past, there's the city of Sacramento. That little channelized curve is the Sacramento River. In flood years, the Yolo bypass can carry a flow of over 850,000 cubic meters per minute. That's larger than most rivers in the world. It provides floodplain habitat of almost 60,000 acres. It provides flood protection for 650,000 people, and it protects over $60 billion in public and private assets. This is a success for those of us who are in the know, who do this work, but I'm thinking about the question we heard earlier. What about the people who have no idea? Our last election was really interesting for a few reasons. But one of them was the state of California decided it was time for new bonds. Now, we pass public funding bonds all the time for climate work, but never really at this scale. This one was a question: would voters be willing to pay $10 billion of California's money, not federal money, simply the state of California's money through our general tax fund, to pay for climate resilient solutions, to pay for water quality and clean water solutions, to pay for wildfire and drought solutions? And it seems so unlikely that in the current political environment, anybody would say yes, that there was actually no campaigning. It was very different from when we passed our previous climate bond back in the middle of our drought. So there was really it was kind of a sleeper proposition, because people just wanted to see, how would it go? Well, how does it go in a state that, we are identified as liberal, but that's really just the coast. As soon as you move into our Central Valley and our mountains, we are deeply, deeply conservative. 60% of voters approved this bond last November. This says to me that people who are not in the know, People who only have the most superficial awareness of what it means to have clean water, of what climate change and its impacts actually are. You will never convince me that 60% of voters are climate experts or water experts or salmon experts like those of us in this room. It's not possible. So this is just people speaking from their heart. And despite the fact that many of them made an absolutely mad choice on other aspects of our national ballot, they wanted this, and they knew the only way to pay for it was to dig into their own pockets. This is a decisive moment. And I think right now, going back to scaling courage, this encourages me that it is worth saying the thing out loud in the room because people care. It matters to them. But courage isn't just something that arises from these decisive moments. And I'm going to quote actually a spiritual leader who we have in the United States who says, decisive moments are almost always preceded by seasons of preparation, and they are followed by an equally important season of alignment in which we learn to live according to what the decisive moment revealed. How we prepare for decisive moments determines our ability to step up to them when they come. That's why conferences like this are so important. I've heard about a lot of the really fraught issues that we're talking about, and I've also seen people talk about them openly, honestly, and they're very difficult. We are right now in the practice of building courage, because eventually we will need to do it outside of this room. I think the other reason to focus on courage actually is more fundamental, and so my final slide, I'll leave you with actually a quote from another spiritual leader. What counts is not the enormity of the task, but the size of the courage. If we focus on the task, if we focus on the time, it is daunting, because none of us will be able to solve it alone. But if instead what we focus on is what we can bring, the courage to work together for these solutions, then we'll have left a really beautiful, inspiring, and miraculous legacy. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And that was so moving. Thank you so much for that. If you cannot have a relationship, you cannot have a project. Thank you very much. Extremely inspiring stuff. I'm delighted now to introduce Mike Meneer from the Pacific Salmon Foundation to talk about salmon for people. Mike has 2 decades of experience in journalism, fundraising and public affairs in the United States and Canada, and he's been president and CEO of the Pacific Salmon Foundation since April 2019, and in his spare time, he is a film and television actor. Mike. I couldn't resist.
I hope you wouldn't miss that. You've done a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, if you saw the second Shades of Grey movie, you would have seen me fully clothed playing an auctioneer. So that's true. Look it up. Thank you very much, Ella, where you're back there. Thank you so much for this. And let me just say a huge thank you to our hosts and the organizers, particularly Mark Bilsby and Wendy Kenyon. Thank you so much. And I'd like to give you a round of applause for all that you've done. And the Wild Salmon Alliance, and of course, Nigel, thank you very much, and Andrew for this very generous hosting of us at the Fishmongers. We're so delighted to be here and to celebrate with all of you, salmon people. When we talked about the theme of my talk, salmon people, this was super exciting for me because, lo and behold, we at the Pacific Salmon Foundation, when we did a rebranding exercise a couple of years ago, decided to come up with a nice, nifty motto. And the motto that we came up with was People for Salmon. I should probably click this to show you that. People for Salmon. That is really our watchword. And it really is heartening to be with all of you and to hear other speakers talking about the importance of bringing people together around salmon. We are an independent, nonprofit organization that depends on the support of donors, the broader public. We have a laser focus on wild salmon conservation and rebuilding. And we do the work through the full life cycle of Pacific salmon. Our reach is through British Columbia and the Yukon, and more we are seeing our connections to our friends like Anne and Jacques, Anne in California, Jacques in Washington State. We, of course, as the Salmon Foundation, the Pacific Salmon Foundation, often get asked the question, how are salmon doing? You heard from my colleague, Dr. Katrina Connors, so I won't go into great detail. But like all of you, we are facing very challenging times for salmon. But I want to acknowledge as well that while our situation is very challenging, we fully acknowledge that our numbers are a little higher than those of you with the Atlantic salmon, and that we acknowledge in a very particular way how challenged and how hard you're working to address the challenges of Atlantic salmon. And it's really heartening for us to be able to be here to learn from you and to share a bit with you. But like many of you, the numbers are stark. 70% of our salmon, our species of Pacific salmon, are well below their historic averages. So we have a lot of work to do indeed. We've talked as well about all of the many factors that are facing Pacific salmon. We won't go into all of these in great detail, but it's clear that we have cumulative effects that are affecting salmon. And it's really absolutely significant that we address all of these things everywhere all at once. I think that's been said before. We have been doing over the last couple of years work on a State of Salmon report, which we just came out with this past year. It's a fantastic document. It looks at all of our salmon stocks all throughout British Columbia. And I want to thank Dr. Katrina Connors for all the important work that she's done on this product. And we're very happy to talk with you about it because collecting data and information and sharing it widely is absolutely critical if we're going to engage all of these public audiences that are so important to us. We at the Pacific Salmon Foundation believe very strongly that we have to engage everybody. And one of our strategic planning imperatives that came out of our work that we did over the last couple of years is that we approach everything through the understanding that climate change is a major issue facing salmon, and also that we have to broaden our network of partners. And so when we use the word reconciliation, this really is something that PSF has only begun to work on in earnest in the last few years. And I would say part of it has been driven by the fact that our government in Canada and British Columbia has adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as a framework for making decisions around natural resources. And it's been a tremendous learning opportunity for us, a tremendous opportunity to build new bridges and new relationships. This is actually my very passionate colleague, Jason Huang, who you heard from yesterday, speaking with one of the leaders of the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. You saw yesterday that big backup of salmon that we had in Tsleil-Waututh territory a couple of years ago. It used to be that if PSF saw a problem like this, where would we turn? We would turn to the government. And what are they going to do about it? And if they weren't going to do anything about it, well, we'd say, well, it's too big of a problem to get those tens of thousands of salmon through. We've totally changed our paradigm. Now we are looking to our First Nations leaders, and we are saying to them, lead us, help us, work with us. And as a result of these types of relationships with the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations and many others, we are activating and opening up habitat and getting salmon back to their spawning habitats in our critical rivers. People have been an absolute critical part of our organization since our beginning in 1987. We have a very interesting relationship with recreational anglers. When you buy your saltwater fishing license every year, you also can buy a salmon conservation stamp. That stamp generates about $1.5 million a year for us that we then reinvest into local community catchment watershed programs and activities. And we were historically a recreational angling supported organization. Our interactions with indigenous communities were very limited. There's a great story through the salmon stamp of being able to take that money from anglers and invest it into habitat education projects all throughout British Columbia. For every dollar that we raise through that stamp, we're able to then lever it at a local level by $7, $8, or $9. So last year we had $1.5 million come from our salmon stamp. When we worked with our local partners, and now more and more indigenous entities in addition to hunting and angling clubs, they raised another $9 million. So over our 30-plus years with the salmon stamp, we have put out more than $24 million, and that levering factor of $1 to $7 is huge and has been tremendously instrumental for us with our politicians in getting them to invest more money. It's also given us good funds to build these relationships with First Nation communities all across British Columbia. And I'm really delighted and excited that we were able to get one of our outstanding leaders, Indigenous leaders from British Columbia, to actually join us. First Nations Fisheries Council is the umbrella entity for the 200-plus Indigenous nations that we have in British Columbia, all of them affected by salmon, working on salmon. They've been helping us these last few years develop our capacity to work with Indigenous nations. Some of you may have met Stu Barnes, who is here with us at the conference. And since Stu was able to come, I thought I'd give him a little bit of time to introduce himself and talk a bit about the work that we're doing. So, Stu, I'd like to invite you to come up. You want to push the clicker?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I'll try to remember that. Why, Simigayet, Siganum Hanak, Ankh Gawasam, dignitaries, matriarchs, fellow salmon warriors. It's a great honor for me to be here today, and thanks, Mike, for sharing the floor with me today. Amahiluk is how we say good morning in my language. And you know, as a Gitsan, my name is Stu Barnes in the Western Society, but I carry the traditional name of Kildzuk. That is from the House of Dawamuch of the Gitsan Nation. And per capita, our people consume the most salmon in the world. At least that's the claim of our elders. So given that we are both here today on the same stage smiling, it might surprise you that PSF and FNFC did not always work together harmoniously. There was a time when there was a concern that the two organizations that had very similar, had focused on similar goals could only be in competition with each other. Through a lot of hard work, showing up to difficult conversations, and embracing shifts in thinking, the space that the organizations now occupy is one of collaboration, partnership, and shared values. PSF shows up as a true partner, standing beside organizations like us instead of in front of us. Just a few weeks ago, Mike and I signed a Commitment to Action Accord, committing the two organizations to work collaboratively on restoring and protecting wild Pacific salmon for future generations. That could not have happened without transformative thinking, which is what we continue to pursue as we look at changing ways of doing salmon recovery in British Columbia. Murray and Ed on the left, one of Mike and I's good friends, says that challenging the status quo of the current structures and processes is necessary if we want to save the species. Extinction is not an option. And no matter what the problem is, it's a people problem, and it's going to require radical system transformation. First Nations are often caught between two worlds as we navigate between the Crown governments and our own government structures. Nowhere is this more evident than our juxtaposition of traditional knowledge versus Western science. These two ways of exploring our world have often been at odds and with each other. leaving First Nations in a position of having to use Western science as a way to prove traditional management ways. But through continuous dialogue and relationship building, we have come to a place in BC where we can approach problems in a holistic way that embraces multiple paths to a solution, including traditional ones. So when we talk about traditional knowledge and First Nations governance structures, it is also important to understand the scope we are referencing. In our province alone, we have over 200 plus First Nations nations. And that's me, the Gitxsan, Lafayette, way up there in northwest BC. And I've had to make the sacrifice to move way down below even where we can see on this map to Vancouver City Centre in order to embrace this leadership role in building relationships. And at the behest of my own community who really did value my leadership skills in the rural areas. So this is a very important issue to the people that I come from in order for me to go out and share my skill and leadership skills with the rest of the province. They're sacrificing my leadership on the notion that the greater good of salmon needs to be upheld. So this is a massive amount of people with very different values, priorities, trying to navigate a complicated ecosystems. It is astonishing that these groups can come together, stand side by side with partners like Pacific Salmon Foundation and Crown governments as we all commit to the hard work of shifting to recover the species. So with that, I just want to turn it back over to Mike and thank him for allowing me some time on the stage today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stu. And Stu really hit on the theme that I hope I can leave you with today relative to our experience in British Columbia, and that is system transformation. It's a whole new area for PSF, and I would suggest that it's an area that all of us have to become much more comfortable with and have courage to enter into. We're all good at the science, we're all good at the habitat work, communicating with school children. It's wonderful. We need to be doing all of this. But I think more and more those of us who are deeply passionate about salmon and who commit our life to it have to move beyond the hard science. We need the hard science, but we also need the social science. This schematic here is out of the research, social science research that Stu and I and our organizations have been doing. And this basically shows you what our system is, the people system that we have right now in British Columbia. You have DFO here, which is our major federal crown organization. You have the government of British Columbia, our provincial crown government. We have 200 some First Nations. We have these exotic political programs that get announced every couple of years with big funding and big, celebrations and press conferences. And we gladly take the money, and we do great things with the money. We're grateful for it. But there are these bubbles of disconnection. Everyone wants to save wild salmon, but we're disconnected. And what Stu and I and our colleagues at PSF and FNFC are trying to do is to say, we have these really significant levers that we can pull for salmon, but we don't have a plan. We don't have a system to come together, to figure this out together, to set priorities together. And so this is very strange for us, because we'd much rather be out mucking about in the rivers. We'd much rather be in the labs. We'd much rather be doing the work that we're familiar with and comfortable with. But that's not enough for the challenges that we're facing. So we at the Salmon Foundation, an organization that is all about people and driven by people and connecting with people, knew that we had to think differently. And so when we did our strategic plan a couple of years ago, we didn't talk so much now about science and habitat and hatcheries. We're talking now about these big strategic themes like how do we recover salmon populations and restore habitats that are so significantly degraded when 70% of your populations are below their long average. When you have climate change, how do we think about what we can do to make salmon resilient for the future, and to ensure, as Nathan noted yesterday about strongholds, how do we protect what we have? We need to be about recovery, we need to be about resilience, and I think most importantly, and Stu and our organizations are spending so much time on this issue of systems transformation. It's absolutely critical. And so we've completely reoriented our organization around these concepts. Yes, we will continue to do the science, the data, and innovation. We'll continue to raise money from the stamp and mobilize funding. But there are new areas that we are entering into. Now we're entering into this space of convening, realizing that our organizations are unique in that we have the ability, like the Wild Salmon Alliance, to bring disparate people together to get on with dialogue and solutions. So now we're doing convening. We used to say we don't do advocacy. We just save the salmon. Others will do that. Well, when you get into science and research and you see all this degradation that we have on our landscape, how can you not be an organization committed to education and influence and advocacy? And building capacity, another significant area. Our First Nations partners, 210 of them around the province, many of them simply don't have the capacity to do the work that they want to do on the ground for salmon. So we have an endowment of $40 million. We have the ability to go into ministers' offices together and make the case for salmon. And so now we're asking for orders of magnitude more dollars, more funding opportunities to invest in capacity building with our First Nations partners as the lead. It's absolutely critical. I'm running short on time here. I wanted to make sure that Stu had a little bit of an opportunity to speak. This is an example of what we mean for people for salmon. I've heard a number of times over the last few days that we're worried that people don't care about salmon. Well, I would like to suggest to you, if you're worried about that, have you asked them? At the Salmon Foundation, we hired this really smart woman named Alison Kalina about 3 years ago, and you're going to hear from her in a little bit. And she said that to me when she came in to work at our organization as head of marketing 3 years ago. She said, have we asked them? I said, no, we just assumed. Well, we asked them, and now we do a poll every 2 years of British Columbians on where they rank Pacific salmon and all these other big priorities that we have, healthcare, housing. 86% of British Columbians tell us that their number one environmental priority is saving wild Pacific salmon. 86% of British Columbians tell us that their number one environmental priority is saving wild Pacific salmon. That ranks above single-use plastics, and it ranks above climate change in general. And so when Stu and I set out on this relationship-building exercise and the idea of creating a dialogue series that would bring people together, we knew that we had the strength in numbers behind us, that people care deeply in British Columbia. And so that's why, as we've created this Salmon Dialogue series, all focused on systems transformation, all focused on collaborative systems for prioritizing and saving salmon, we were able to get people that normally wouldn't be in a room together to come. This is Martin Paish. He's the executive director of the Sport Fish Advisory Board. His constituency of 250,000 people buy our salmon stamp every year. That's the historic audience that we hang out. He's a great guy. He's a biologist. He's really bright, and he's a passionate supporter. I'm not sure how many times he'd actually been in a room with Indigenous leaders talking about how we save salmon together. Jordan Point, Stu's predecessor. But that's the power of salmon, is to bring people together because everyone is committed, not just because they want to access salmon, but because it's part of our lifeblood. It's part of our culture and part of our history as people of British Columbia. So I want to end on that picture. I have a bunch of other things to say. And simply to say that I've enjoyed so much the last several days learning from so many of you that already have these collaborative systems in place. And for those of you that are thinking maybe we should try to figure out how to bring more people together around salmon, I hope you'll take some inspiration from what we're doing in British Columbia to bring people together around systems transformation. That social science piece is absolutely critical to our future and our ability to do what we want to do for wild salmon. And I'll leave you with just one little statistic that I think encapsulates what we're talking about. We've been learning a lot from our friends in Washington State. Jacques White's here. They have a fantastic system of collaborative governance in Washington State. We've done a dialogue series on a variety of habitat projects and science projects. And one of the leaders of an indigenous tribe in Washington State had presented on a huge estuary project that they had done collaboratively in their catchment. And it was such an amazing project. It's having huge success for salmon. And I asked him at the end of his presentation, how much did that cost? Because we've got like 100 of those projects that need to be done in British Columbia. And his answer was, it cost 10,000 cups of coffee. 10,000 cups of coffee. That's what we have to do. And I think we're doing a lot of that here. And I want to thank the organizers for giving us that opportunity to do that here. But it's those 10,000 cups of coffee that not only are going to help us save salmon, but they're going to enrich our relationships and our lives in such a significant way. So, Stu, thank you for, I don't know how many cups of coffee we've had, a few. We've got a few more to have, but I want to thank you for being here and demonstrating your support and your leadership in British Columbia. And thank all of you for taking the time to listen to me this morning. Thanks.
That was incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, Stu. It's a privilege to hear you talk. In Ireland, we have a small but burgeoning organisation called Farming for Nature, and just hearing Mike talk about the power of salmon to bring us together, this small organisation led by some very inspirational people have brought people together just like that. The common goal of bringing a more ecological focus on farming has brought the most remarkable people in the same room together. And it's been a remarkable thing to witness myself, the common goal and how people, in some ways, it's all of us that need healing, not the salmon. But I'm delighted now, on the note of farming and how to engage farmers, to introduce Teresa Dent. She has a degree in agriculture. She joined the Land and Estate agents Strutton Parker as a farming consultant, and she stayed with them for many years. She joined what was then the Game Conservancy and is now the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. And she is working with farmers to create environmental farmer groups together at catchment scale to achieve ambitious environmental outcomes. I'm very much looking forward to hearing her talk. Teresa Dent, everyone.
Ella, thank you very much. The GWCT is very proud to be a founder member of the Missing Salmon Alliance, and it's great to be here for these 3 days. GWCT is an environmental NGO, but we are very science-focused, very evidence-led. Over half our staff are scientists working in the field or in the river or on the moorland, and you met Dr. Sophie Elliott, our fisheries ecologist yesterday. We don't have nature reserves as a charity, although nature reserves are wonderful places. We feel our mission is to do the research that shows how you can restore and enhance nature alongside economic land use. And our mission is to help and inspire people who manage their own land to make it a better place for nature. So that mission explains some of the journey we've been on when it comes to convening farmer groups to achieve nature recovery at scale. So there are two big drivers that we're all facing at the moment, nature recovery and climate change mitigation. I believe farmers and land managers are absolutely key to this because they manage 72% of the land that the rain falls on and ends up in our rivers. Nature reserves are wonderful places, but they cover 8%, and we can't restore nature through nature reserves. It's a mathematical impossibility. I believe farmers, or the farmers we work with, have proven nature credentials. They are very outcome focused. They are capable of delivering coordinated landscape scale change. But to scale up, we have to engage with those farmers and land managers. And we have been setting up these environmental farmer groups, or convening these environmental farmer groups, the logo is there, for 2 to 3 years now, and they follow an initiative we launched, supported by government in 2015, which was farmer clusters. So environmental farmer groups, similar concept, but much bigger and more ambitious, and building on new natural capital markets. Interesting, your cup of coffee on convening. I can tell you that convening in the south of England costs bacon rolls. Convening in the uplands, it's pie and peas and a pint. So local differences matter. So this is all about enabling farmers' ambition when it comes to the environment. So the vision for the environmental farmers groups is farmers protecting and enhancing nature for public good. And these groups are farmer-owned, farmer-led. And I think that's very important. So it isn't the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust doing this. We're just helping farmers do it, and they're leading their own cooperatives. The mission is to harness scale and member cooperation to secure the best environmental results and financial returns for a wide range of natural capital goods and services. So our home catchment for GWCT is the Avon catchment. I could actually float, perhaps one day I will, from my house, which is a few hundred yards from the river, quite a few miles downstream to my office, which looks out over the same river. It's a good sponsored fundraiser. We've got a few of our team here today. There are a few obstacles in the way, unfortunately. So in that catchment, the changes made to farming policy in the last few years means that 37 million will be removed from farmers when our basic payment scheme goes, which basically finishes next year. So these farmers are needing to look for new sources of income, and natural capital is important for them, and giving them a way to access those complex new markets is something that we are, but still achieve those really good environmental results is something that we're trying to do through these environmental farmer groups. So every environmental farmer group has 3 core objectives: to reverse biodiversity loss and achieve species recovery, to get cleaner water in our rivers, and to try and get to net carbon zero by 2040. I say try because we don't know if we can do it yet. We've got environmental farmer groups in both the lowlands and the uplands. The first upland one we did was in the Peak District. They have a few more objectives because they've got peatland restoration, cleaner air, and also fairer representation. And some of the people in the room here, it's been very interesting hearing these references to First Nation people. There is a sense in the uplands that the farmers are a bit disenfranchised from the decisions that are made about how land is managed, that their traditional generational knowledge is not sufficiently listened to. And it's been a strong feature of the upland ones that they do want to be having better conversations with the Nature Conservancy organisations. So how can environmental farmer groups help river restoration? Well, as I say, we've got them in both the upland and the lowland. We focus them around river catchments because that makes sense from the farmer's sense of place. It gives us enough scale. My home catchment of the Avon, which is that lowest southern one with the sort of triangular shape, that is the largest chalk stream catchment in England. So I assume the world, given that we have 85% of chalk streams in England. And the farmers themselves are expanding these groups. So on that map, the blue is the area of land covered by the farmers who've become members of EFG or expressed interest in becoming members of EFG. The bold lines are the catchments that they're working in, and their ambition is to impact nature conservation at that catchment scale. And you can see where we started with the Avon, which we launched in May 2023, so only 2 years ago. We've already spread through farmers, this is word of mouth, no advertising, it's farmers ringing each other up and then ringing me up saying, can we do one? We've expanded into Test and Itchen, we're now going further east into the Meehan and Rother, Dorset Stour, up into Exmoor, Central England, Peak District, Swaledale and Wensleydale, and starting in the North York Moors, and then the circles are where we've had interest expressed. So this is a really strong farmer-led movement, and I think the fact that they are developing it themselves with a bit of convening help and a few bacon butties shows a really strong environmental commitment and ambition. So at the moment we have 700 farmers and moorland managers, either as paying members or who've expressed interest in joining. Between them they cover over 350,000 hectares of land they own and have control over themselves. It's about 900,000 acres. That is 3.8% of England, so that's the blue area. If you take the catchment area into account, which is their ambition, we're looking at 17 to 20% of England. So I am, perhaps you can understand why, I'm quite excited about this. So 72% of land is managed by farmers. There are about 70,000 farmers, I think, in England. I once asked the farm manager who runs GWCT's research and demonstration farm how many decisions he made in his day-to-day farming each day that had an impact on the environment. And he said 10. So the thing that really interests me about this is if we can get 5 of those decisions for all of those farmers on 72% of our land more environmentally favourable, we are really making progress. And in terms of river restoration, to me it's all about harnessing the power of this farmer collaboration and their commitment to outcomes once you get them going. Anne gave some evidence of improvement that she was getting through the work she's doing working with land managers. In the Lower Avon, the farmers down there have been particularly working on lapwing, and they have doubled the number of lapwing in 5 years on their farms. As I say, I have nothing against nature reserves, they're wonderful places, but there isn't a nature reserve in England that's achieved that in 5 years, but the farmers have. So when they decide to do it, they are very, very effective. We're looking at whole river restoration projects in the Hampshire Avon, the Test and Itchen, the Froome and Piddle, the Meehan and Rother, also up in Swaledale and Wensleydale, and I've been talking to farmers recently on the Devron, and there are a couple of Devron farmers here today. This scale is much bigger than the government's landscape recovery scheme, which Daniel Zeichner talked about yesterday. So that's a great scheme. And we do have landscape recovery projects in these EFG areas, but the biggest one in the Avon catchment is 6,500 hectares, and the Avon catchment is 175,000 hectares. So I want bigger scale. These farmers are very committed to meeting and beating government's environmental targets, which are now legally binding, which is interesting because that's the first time. They're doing their own water quality testing on some of their rivers now, so they're learning themselves what happens, what the impact of their farming operations is on water quality, because they're testing their own water. And we've never involved farmers in this sort of stuff before. And who was it this morning who said, oh, it was Alastair Fothergill. He said, if you wag your finger, people stick their head in the sand. So please don't wag your finger at farmers. Please get the head out of the sand and get them thinking about collaboration and large-scale working. At the moment, this initiative, fantastic though it is a little bit stalled through lack of funding for large-scale collaborative nature restoration. And I have been having conversations with Daniel Zeichner, and I hope the vote on how money fined water companies is going to be spent went the right way yesterday, because that river restoration fund would be a hugely valuable source of funding for these groups. The benefits of convening these environmental farmer group models for the farmers is considerable, get more opportunity to do the type of work they want to do. It also gives them some negotiating power. Farmers have always been price takers, so it matters to be able to have slightly stronger negotiating power. It gives them access to opportunities, and it gives them a level of farmer autonomy. For the environment, and so for GWCT, I'm really excited about this, it allows us to make changes to land use and land management at a sufficient scale that we should get demonstrable, measurable delivery. Well, that's very exciting. For companies or institutions who want to invest in natural capital, please don't send your money abroad, or send some abroad, but also think about these opportunities on your doorstep in the catchments where your staff live. I worked out that 57% of my staff live in the Avon catchment, and we're quite a small employer. So we need to talk to all those companies and say, come and help us with this. And it gives them a single point of contact, much lower risk, and sufficient scale for the type of investment that they're going to be looking for. So to sum up, I hope that next time you have this conference, I know it was talked about next year, and Mark Bilsby went a bit white at that thought, but maybe the year after, I hope that one of these farmers will be your inspirational talks. I think there is enormous scope. I think it's an opportunity for a step change in river restoration, but not just river restoration, there's other species recoveries as well. We do need a functioning grant scheme to make this work, to get it developed, and we need a functioning natural capital market. But the scope for this is considerable. And just to give a little example, we've done some modelling for the 133 farmers working together in the Swale and Ure, and we think if they work together, they could quite easily reduce the peak flow and flood risk by 5%. And that's quite a big figure. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're going to talk about nature financing, but first, coffee and cake. And please come back in 15 minutes if you can. Thank you.